Super excited to be here at the Digital Fusion Summit. This is such a great opportunity to interact, brainstorm ideas with some of the top minds. I think there's much more to come in the space.
I think that the technology and what's driving here is giving us a lot of optimism, giving us back a lot of control, giving us back a lot of agency over our financial futures. It's awesome. If you're not optimistic being in this space, I don't know what you're doing in the space.
Because we're in such an emerging space, it's essential to kind of be looking a few maneuvers out, a few moves down the road always. So we're setting the table now for what you're doing.
We are seeing an unprecedented amount of receptiveness when we are reaching out to legislators.
It's about the momentum in the right directions. And there's lots of people in the industry and they have a dream. I think it's the people that are from a diverse background that are following a good group of intellectual leaders that are going to go out and give you good results.
I'm very happy with the enthusiasm that I'm seeing in the space. It's becoming more collaborative, and spaces like this show that.
Because I think now crypto has actually really matured. It's finally starting to take hold.
That's really the value of what the Digital Ascension Group does, is it takes a bunch of institutional capital and it delivers it to people that are here to learn more and be part of the digital asset revolution.
Fantastic event tonight. We had speakers from all across the industry talk about different areas in digital assets, in tax, compliance, and legal. We had people on the fraud panel, and we had people talk about institutions meeting with DeFi and how that's going to affect you and your portfolio if you're invested in digital assets. So if you haven't registered for the next one, we'll have this up soon, and we want to see you here in 2026.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the W of Dallas. Very excited to be moderating. My name is Ray Fuentes, hosting the Digital Fusion Summit 2025. For those of you who were here last year, welcome back. For those of you who it's your first time, welcome. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors. But before we kick things off with our thought-provoking panels, I do want to give the stage to the man behind the curtain, Jake Claver. This Digital Fusion Summit wouldn't be here made possible if it wasn't for Jake. Everybody give a round of applause.
All right. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Super excited. So this is the second one of these we put on. The first one was last year in September. Close to 300 people registered for this event. Close to $500 billion in the room tonight. Just blessed and grateful to be here with you guys. And really, we're at the forefront of a lot of different technologies converging all at one time. But tonight we're going to focus on blockchain, digital assets, smart contracts, and what that looks like in a professional setting. Earlier on in my career, I made a good chunk of change in crypto, and it was very difficult for me to find the right professionals to work with. And so I called over 100 different firms across the US that said they dealt with crypto. And through vetting those, I whittled it down to the 50 people we work with today. And in that process, people were nice enough to make a few introductions for myself. And that's how we got our start working with family offices, consulting in these professional services for digital assets. So we work with 9 different family offices. We have the fastest growing RIA in the world. That's because of you guys, right? So if you have digital assets and you're looking to hold them somewhere safe and secure for your loved ones, want to make sure that it's, buttoned up and you have a spot where you have an advisor, things are put in place so that if God forbid something happens to you, we make sure that people are taken care of. And I think that's why we've seen such the growth that we have. And we want to make sure that people are able to keep their assets, right? A lot of people believe that these assets are going to appreciate substantially over their lifetime and even beyond. And I really didn't see a way that people could keep from liquidating those and having large tax implications. And so that's what we're going to get into tonight. We're going to get into the strategies. A lot of the professionals that are going to come up here and speak on the panels are in specific areas when it comes to these professional services, including mandated taxes. We'd have good tax attorneys. We got some CPAs, accountants, compliance, legal, some of the boring stuff, but they'll try to make it as sexy as they can for you guys. And then we have our Keynote speech again from Anchorage. I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, compliers, algos, you got Texas Blockchain Council, and many others. So thank you to you guys. It wouldn't have been possible to put this event on without y'all. So just round of applause for our sponsors.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me up on stage here. Let's talk about all things emerging DeFi protocols, the convergence with institutional adoption, how to make your digital assets work. Connor, do you mind starting things off?
All right, thank you guys so much for coming. It's definitely a very interesting time in the cryptocurrency space. Us at Digital Wealth Partners, one of the things we're specifically trying to do is really mix the emergence of really professionalizing this industry with a lot of the very interesting things that you're able to do with your digital assets in the market. So one of the things I've often come across is people have digital assets, they have cryptocurrency, but when it comes to the deployment, the usage of the assets, running strategies on the assets, those are typically things that your average person, your average cryptocurrency investor wants to be able to do, but might not have the time, might not have the expertise to actually run these specific strategies. And especially with where the market's going, a lot of these things are becoming algorithmic. A lot of these things are being done by professionals. And the vast majority of people, especially high net worth individuals, I found want exposure to these different things, want to be able to get these kinds of performance names on digital assets, but might not want to be sitting in front of their computer running that individual strategy on their own. So one of the things we're trying to do at Digital Wealth Partners is really combine these two things in people secure institutional storage of digital assets. And we work with Anchorage Digital for that, one of the leaders in actually institutional custody in the space. But Verge that will bring opportunities to our clients to actually get enhanced performance on those assets and run strategies that they might not be capable or might not want to do on their own. So we're really trying to bridge that gap and bring an avenue to people to really explore digital assets, have someone they can work with to do that, and have professional grade solutions to order to run those strategies. So couldn't be more excited about kind of that opportunity, bringing that to market. And yeah, excited to be on stage with partners making that happen.
Hey guys, my name is Adam Richard. I'm one of my partners at 2 Prime. We are a crypto asset manager. We're an SEC registered investment advisor, and we really focus on trading derivatives in order to produce yield for our clients. So when you're looking at working with a wealth manager or an asset manager for yield or income, there's really from the same metrics that you're looking for across the board. The way we look at it is you want to benchmark your performance against the asset itself. So if that asset is Bitcoin or Ethereum or XRP, you want to just look at the performance against the asset itself. So as crypto investors, if I'm holding a lot of Bitcoin, I want to look at how does that perform against Bitcoin itself, or how does it perform against whatever coin it is that I'm holding. And so that means you're generating alpha, and you want to do that with as little volatility in the strategy as possible. And in doing that, you get the best risk-adjusted returns, which is your Sharpe ratio. So those are the main things that we're looking at when we're looking for what does well, what do we think clients want, and then be able to kind of scale that up and down based on that client's risk tolerance.
Thank you, Ad. Appreciate that, sir. Matt, moving over to you, sir. Knowing that you authored your very own book, Warren Buffett in a Web3 World. You right, Blake? Crowd. What principles would you recommend that Warren Buffett practices that you would apply to your investment thesis when navigating the DeFi world?
It's a fantastic question. Just because Buffett hates crypto doesn't mean that we can't learn a little bit from the Oracle of Omaha, all right? Number one, circle of competence. If you don't understand it, if you can't explain this investment to your partner, to your spouse, to your child, let's maybe have a think about how much we have invested in it, right? It's very important to understand what these assets do, how we made them, why they're made, what services they function, what utility they have. Circle of competence of number one. Buffett never invests in things he doesn't understand, which is why he didn't get into Apple until like 2010, something like that. And why he bought encyclopedias, which we don't have anymore. The second one that I think is really important that he thinks of all the time, 1992, he said,
a hyperactive market is the pickpocket of enterprise. And what that means is that crypto is not stable, if anything, right? It's a volatile asset class. It moves around all the time at 24/7 speed. And it's important to understand that the more actively you do something, unless you're a tried and true and tested asset manager, like a team at 2 Prime is, you're probably in your best interest sitting on your hands and not making those actions that you think you should buy or sell or you should sell. So hyperactivity, the movement of markets really fast, is always going to be something that's a bit of a concern. Think of the third one that I think always really liked, and he talks about McDonald's and how he sold McDonald's way too early, and he said you would have been better off if I, as an asset manager, went to the movies instead of letting emotions get the best of me. Right? We often think of investments as tied to money, and money goes up and money goes down, and my wealth goes up and my wealth goes down, and certainly the more zeros that you add to that number, the more palpitating that feeling can be, right? We all have it personally and inherently in ourselves, that emotion of buying and selling and where the market goes. So step back and try to do what you can to really understand that this is just a tool to really better your life, and try to remove as much emotion as possible from it. And I think that Buffett would be proud. Again, he'll still hate crypto and call it poison squared. Or Charlie Munger, rest his soul, we'll call it crypto crapo. But hey, we're still here, and it's a very anti-fragile ecosystem. We're so happy to have you. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing and kind of combining both of what Bat said and obviously what Adam at 2 Prime said, we have a lot of people who work with us who have a very high degree of confidence in a certain asset, right? Whether that's Bitcoin, whether that's XRP, or whether that's a different asset. And a lot of people are here to learn about cryptocurrency, and obviously that's very exciting as well. Obviously, us at DWP, we want to be able to explain where we think the winners are going to be, but it's more obviously than just holding on to that asset. Being able to work with people like Adam, so you don't have to be that professional running strategies to create that performance, right? It's not about getting you into things that aren't what that asset is that you wanted to invest in. It's about creating additional performance on that asset, like he said, getting outperformance on something like XRP, getting outperformance on something like Bitcoin. And at Digital Wealth Partners, we want to marry all those things into one place. So not only can you get a recommendation on the directional exposure or that asset that you might think is going to be the winner, but how you outperform on that, and how do you work with professionals to deploy a strategy where suddenly now you have additional kind of exposure and additional performance on that underlying asset. And marrying those two things is really what we want to package into one place and make it so people can do that without having to be the professional themselves.
Well said, Connor. With the short amount of time we have left on this panel, I would love for you guys to provide those in the audience with a brief forward-looking statement. Looking into 2026, what type of opportunities within digital assets do you think will provide the most compelling yield opportunities? And what, from a regulatory standpoint, what is going to create the greatest impact for the industry?
Look, we're pretty agnostic. Like we'll trade what's profitable. When we first started, we were trading, volatility across multiple assets, and we would just shift our clients' portfolios around to whichever asset was more volatile, because that's where we were making the most money. In terms of what's coming up, I think that, we're strictly trading within the big centralized exchanges. And so I think that more custodians working with more assets, opening up the doors to more exchange venues, and ultimately that service is going to become cheaper and cheaper. It's been quite expensive. Like we're looking at, anywhere between 60 to 70, about 0.6 to 0.7% annualized on the entire, assets in the portfolio just to utilize those services. So I think those costs coming down and bringing in more competitors will be really good. And that will happen with, on the regulatory front, better clarity. More players will jump into that space. And in terms of what regulations are going to shape this space, I think that this current administration will improve things in a big way by actually removing a lot of the obstacles that we faced. And so, yes, clarity, but also just stripping away a bunch of unnecessary regulations that have existed for many years.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I completely agree with everything Adam just said. For me, one of the most important things is obviously providing people with avenues and structured products to allow them to get exposure to these kinds of things in a risk mitigated way. I mean, the vast majority of people I talk to don't want to keep a ledger in their sock drawer and have to plug that into their computer and have to worry about things like malware. They don't want to have to sit there and trade on their individual computer and try to run a sophisticated strategy like Adam is running at 2 Prime. So for me, it's creating structured products so that clients can understand the risk and the reward as something they're getting into, but be able to work with professionals to make that happen. And I think there's a lot of interesting tools in the market today, but there's not enough people packaging those into a full service offering and allowing people to get exposure to some of these more advanced product sets that maybe they don't want to run on their own. Maybe they don't have the capabilities to run on their own, but they're allocated the asset. They want to have that increased performance. They want to be doing this in a safe, risk mitigated way. And those are the kinds of things that are, to me, extremely exciting, because for the longest time, you had to do it on your own and you had to take everything and you had to take all the risk and you had to be full time in this market. But being able to create products where people can get that exposure and work with professionals, I think that's one of the biggest things lacking in the market right now. And I think my goal overall is just to create an all-inclusive ecosystem that brings all that together, where people can get exposed to these certain strategy sets and understand what they are, but not have to run them themselves. So to me, that's extremely exciting. And I think it's one of the biggest things lacking in the industry right now, because people want it, but it doesn't mean they necessarily want to be on their computer all day, managing a liquidity pool or trading derivatives. So bridging that gap, I think, is very
Or can measure right there.
Yeah.
I'll just add on his last point. That's for anyone that thinks that they can do. So we're within the crypto markets where they're 24/7, 365. We have to have a global team in all major time zones. And we have to build systems that are automated, systematic, that can run without us. So, it takes a large team. It takes a global coverage to really, watch these assets around the clock.
Just take a moment and recognize where you are in this space right now. It's 2025. Digital asset legitimacy and validation is through the roof in terms of how people, institutions, governments, countries believe in these assets. A few years ago, we were just weird crypto people in the room. For the most part, we're super nasty. But take a moment and be proud of the fact that you're here in an asset class that is legitimizing itself by the day and cementing itself in the history of becoming a new asset class that people pour trillions of dollars into, quadrillions of dollars into over the next decade and decades to come. And part of why I love working at this company is because we get to do creative things like putting your assets to work in ways that don't exist right now, because the pikes just aren't there. There's not an easy way to do this. There's not an easy way to get yield on XRP. There's not an easy way to put people in a place where they can use their traditional assets or their crypto assets and pair them with traditional assets. We are at the convergence of traditional and digital economies, and that's why it's really powerful to be here and working with this team. And that's what we're doing with the funds, and that's what we're doing with our investment opportunities at Digital Wealth Partners. And so I think just take a moment to be so proud of yourself for being here, because we're making it. The validation, just to me, is just incredible. The recognition of this asset class and the recognition by governments and people about where this is going is just an incredible thing. So as a future-looking statement, think forward that we're in a great spot. That the Goldilocks moment of it's just right. We're not too early and we're not too late. We're really at this chasm place right now, and we're going to get to an incredible space moving forward. And I'm just really proud of the team and happy to be here.
Just closing thoughts. Obviously, guys, thank you so much for coming. We have a really excited group of people up here to talk. Various partners we're working with. Like I said, we want to be that connection point for people. So we want to wrap everything up into one service offering, bring all the professionals in the room in one place, bring everything you need all into one offering. And that's one of the coolest things for me, getting connected to people like Adam and some of our other partners, being able to build those structured products for people all in one space, build them inside an institutional custodian like Anchorage that actually has the client protections we need to offer those things. These are the kinds of things that to me are so, so powerful and are bringing that legitimacy to the space, right? We all know the hardship cryptocurrency has gone through. It seems like we're making that turn, but I kind of look at the people who come up on the stage and talking as the leaders of bringing that professionals into the space. So I couldn't be more excited to be a part of it as someone who's a huge fan of cryptocurrency for so long. To be one of the people driving the innovation and driving the adoption on the back end is surreal to me. And couldn't be more excited to be part of the company and being able to really build out what I think the future of this industry will be.
I'll keep it short. I'll just say that, our relationship with these guys is in its very early stages, and I just really look forward to a long, fruitful relationship.
Let's go on. Each and gentlemen. Thank you, stand number one. Thank you very much, guys. Give a round of applause. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me up on stage today. With a new Trump administration, there's been rumors and changes to the digital asset taxation. Want to know your thoughts, Rustin? What are you hearing? What anything coming down the pipe that we should be aware of?
There are so many rumors floating around and so many opinions on how to handle things. Top priorities is that there has been a complete lack of tracking. So if you're wondering if you're going to get audited, if you're wondering what you might get audited on and lose from, I would say that basis is the number one thing on tax practitioners' minds now. People have not really kept track of all of their digital asset purchases and acquisitions over the years, and they may have a stack of different tokens and coins, and they don't really remember what they bought them for. They may not remember the transaction fees. They may not remember whether they spent so much on energy and computer equipment to mine them or so much. They may not remember these details because it was kind of going fast and loose. And so now we're getting stuck with a bunch of suggested tax regulatory compliance. And in the middle of this, we get thrown Loper v. Bright, this new Supreme Court of the United States jurisprudence that says we might be able to challenge regulatory authorities more thoroughly. Regulatory authorities like the Treasury, like the IRS. So we're in this point of complete regulatory uncertainty. And what I can say is we need to report normal nuts and bolts on our 1040 returns. We're supposed to report our transactions in digital assets on Form 8949, and a lot of people don't even know what it means to have a transaction. They may not recognize that when they traded from one broker to another or one coin to another, that's a transaction. They may have participated in DeFi and then issued some sort of maybe an LP token or maybe it's a debt instrument. They may not know if that's a transaction. And these things add up to enormous amounts of money and tremendous audit risk with the IRS. I would love to see the IRS, if I was going to do my wish list here, I'd like to get rid of 99% of the problem with one rule. If the IRS wants to be efficient with digital asset transaction taxation, they need to implement the foreign currency de minimis transaction exemptions under Internal Revenue Code section 987 and 988. That'll get rid of like 90% of the problems that aren't going to be revenue raisers. Remember, taxes are there to raise revenues. Taxes are there to regulate things that could cause us problems. And they're also there as part of a system of equity, whether that equity be horizontal or vertical, whether it be progressive, flat, or regressive. They're there to implement those things. And I think that the current system is picking at little teeny straws, little teeny fractures in this market that are not going to serve everyone, and they're not going to raise enough revenue. So I sure hope that the Treasury can get this done and implement the foreign currency de minimis exemptions and not make this come through every little thing we've done for years. But who knows if they will. The 1099-DA, D for digital, A for assets, is coming out this year to replace what was the 1099-B. For brokers, what is a broker? What does that mean? And how are they to report these? They're to report them now on an account by account or a wallet by wallet basis. What's an account and what's a wallet? Did you know that it's not even clear? The nomenclature of digital assets is not entirely clear. What is a wallet? What is a
what is an account and how do you differentiate and how do we do, we basically have to do a FIFO accounting. We have to switch from universal wallet where we might have orphaned basis over here where you accidentally filed your taxes a little wrong and maybe reported you didn't know any capital gains and you took away your basis from a token that's not even in that wallet. Is very challenging. So I'm hoping we can get rid of a lot of these issues with one rule, the de minimis foreign currency exemptions. And I hope that the tracking tools, we're seeing great improvements in software. If we can't get this relief, hopefully the tools will catch up and help us scrub our records so we can get the tax compliance. But as much as we don't want to think about this, this is good news. This kind of regulatory compliance is not in favor of this diffusing, this market diffusing and the innovation reaching widespread adoption. What we tax, we keep or kill. Hopefully we keep.
Hopefully none of the latter. Jake, we've got to take advantage of this opportunity of you on stage here.
With these new and emerging ways of generating yield or return off your XRP, what type of tax implications are you running into or becoming aware of?
Yeah, so again, kind of wild west still in certain ways. These have been treated as capital assets in the past, and so you've had the ability to take long-term capital gains on them if you hold them over a year. You want to hold it the right type of corporation or trust if you're doing that. But we're hoping that Mr. Trump might remove capital gains on certain digital assets here in the U.S. I don't know about you guys. I'd be excited about that. But again, back to Russ's point, there's just a lot of uncertainty currently in the market. So we're able to put these to work and generate a return. We have two options. One is in cash and one is in kind. Now, cash, this could be regular income. But the other way, if you're getting in-kind returns, there's still some nuance there, right? So they haven't defined some of these terms, like he mentioned. So staking provides you in-kind returns of the asset. Well, we're not doing staking, but you're getting in-kind returns. So is that staking? I hear a lot of people ask us if we provide staking, and so they're confused. So, and there's other things about how you hold the wallet. If you have dominion and control is how the U.S. has written the tax code for these distributions in kind for them to be taxed. Well, with our wallets and our partners, you don't have either. You have majority control and do what you say, right? But we're a countersigner on the wallet. So you don't technically have full control of the wallet. And then Anchorage is the custodian, and they would have domain of the wallet. So are these in-kind distributions that you're receiving from our funds taxable? Maybe, maybe not. You know, we have great tax attorneys like Rustin here. And maybe we'll get you to write us a letter. I don't know if he's going to agree with me on this one or not, but I think it's an interesting time that we're in. There's a lot of nuance, right? And Rustin's done very good to write for different forums, published in many capacities. He's working with the state of Utah to help draft the regulation there. And we are now working with the Digital Chamber, talking to them about these things and how the SEC might be drafting the regulation around things. So I think, if we're able to, propose some things to the IRS, I think you're going to see drastic changes in the tax code for sure. But within that, I think we can be at the forefront. And if we are able to use the way they've written these laws up to this point and point some things out, I think we might be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, on the topic of staking, how would that be categorized? In what ways, having spoke to Mark DeMichael, a legal attorney who was supposed to speak on stage tonight, unfortunately couldn't make it, but he was still saying it's even unclear how these movements of money are even going to be categorized. Is it a loan? Is it are you borrowing the assets? And then let's talk about airdrops on top of that as well.
Yeah, all of these different transactions. And really to zoom out, we're talking about DeFi in some senses, and we're talking about different types of transactions in distributed ledger technologies and on Web3. So I zoom out that far and bring up that we're in Web3 here. in that world where we have not only the Web 2 like distributed environment that we're working in. Like, think about the distributed environment of Web 2. It's all over the world. Like, if you want to find the internet, you don't go to like one place, it's everywhere. But the actors on the internet, like say, big companies, Google, they have a headquarters and there's a CEO. There's a centralization of the actors in Web 2. In Web 3, we're going to have decentralized actors. Like, where's the CEO and the headquarters for Bitcoin? It's decentralized, right? So we have decentralized actors on a distributed network. Who's going to tax those? Who do you tax? What do you tax? Those are always the questions for taxation. So staking, let's like get down to that succinct example. We're looking at like, okay, where's the staking occurring? If this is U.S. staking, then we have questions of whether we have an exchange of the base level cryptocurrency. So before we even enter into the staking, we have to ask, was this somehow an exchange that would constitute an accession to wealth, meaning trigger capital gains? Do we have that on the way into staking? We don't want that in any case, so we've got to be cautious there. Now, if we're staking into a pool, do we want it to be a partnership or not? Because you can actually invest in a partnership without having necessarily an automatic capital gain on everything, but maybe you don't want a partnership. So we've got these like do's and don'ts at every single level. What I can say is we're most likely best off in staking pools where we don't have an exchange of the asset for some sort of an equity instrument on average to not trickle the capital gains. As far as the income from the staking pool, is it going to be ordinary income or is it going to be treated for long-term capital gains? Well, that will depend partly on holding periods and partly on whether it is debt. If it's debt and you're getting back interest, fixed and periodic kind of payments, then likely it's going to be ordinary income, and that will be the way it'll be treated. But at least we won't have some sort of a capital gain recognition event on the way in. And in speaking with my colleague that was mentioned earlier, Mark Michael, that wasn't able to attend, this is a big issue. We're bringing up fundamental level tax things of whether an investment is a debt in a company or equity, and this drags all had into like.
Well, you have multiple types of staking, right? So here's the other piece. If it's pure proof of stake, then you're actually giving up the entire asset to the counterparty, right? Whereas if it's delegated proof of stake, you might retain ownership or control of that asset, but you're delegating voting rights or something else. And so that might be the nuance there for, is it equity or is it debt? Are you leasing out the right to use your stuff in their pool? Or is it a loan to them? Like if you like leasing air rights, right? Something you have ownership of, but somebody else is going to use for a period of time. How's that taxed, Rustin? How's leasing air rights taxed?
Yeah, you have your ordinary income most of the time on those kinds of things. We always want to go for capital gains treatment, but not necessarily if it causes you to trip into something else. And so, yeah, derivative rights always imply some sort of taxation, but all these things that are being done now, and let's put in airdrops since we're talking about air rights, right? So if a company drops an airdrop to you, will that be considered like, is that the functional equivalent of a dividend? Or is that truly just an award? Like, because there's different treatment for just pure awards that come from like participation in the company versus dividends. And so we have it's really facts and circumstances. And this is where, like I mentioned, first of all, the low-hanging fruit would be foreign currency de minimis transactions. I say that because that's an easy soundbite. We can do that. Trying to discern all these fine and nuanced questions of whether a staking instrument is debt or equity, whether the staking pool is a partnership, and that implicates security laws, that implicates tax laws. All those things are very nuanced regulatory effort that will come with time. But they are as yet not completely clear. So that is where you need good tax counsel and somebody willing to do the work to actually kind of make sure they've done the process of these.
On the topic of work, what primary strategies would you recommend for digital asset investors to be mindful of?
There's a lot of applications that are tracking basis, to your point. Node 40, we talked to them. They've done a lot about participating in the night. Shout out to those guys. they've done a really good job of putting together software that does track everything back, especially for Bitcoin miners, back to the basis and power cost of when they mine Bitcoin. So kudos to those guys. And to your point, it's becoming a topic that's at the forefront of a lot of tax professionals. But for me, looking at Coinly or, not to prescribe anything in particular, but some type of application that you're connecting to the exchanges, to the counterparties that you're doing business with in your wallets, allowing you to track all those transactions and then create a report. There's a lot of CPAs, Rustin's an expert here, but a lot of people just don't have the understanding of this asset class to be able to dig into the nuance and do the tax reporting and the filings. So if you are able to kind of shorten that curve for them and at least give them a report for your transactions, then I think that's been a long way. What other tools do you see out there, Rustin, that people could leverage?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's by far the number one thing, is to just get on top of your reporting and get on top of it early as much as you can. Cure any basis defects, all those tools. There are legal tools that I work with, and he found quite a few different ways that we could get tax advantages through the use of limited liability companies and trusts. You've got to be cautious getting into these things. It's very easy to kind of trap yourself into paying capital gains taxes by loading your assets into a trust on the way in. Very, very careful. There's investment company rules that could get triggered. You have to be cautious in setting up any structure with these things. As far as putting things into trusts and LLCs, you can start to take advantage of state and local tax deductions that are being expanded under Trump. We love those, the pass-through entity tax deductions. In some cases, enhance your returns. But after tax returns, tax is more money in your pocket. So just keep these things in mind. These are proactive, beyond just curing your basis. Make sure to look out for additional SALT deductions. Using entities, make sure in your entities you're also looking out for opportunities, if you're doing out at the trading volumes, to maybe consider active trader elections, things like 475 elections. Excellent. By coupling these with trusts, now you got to be careful. We even kind of put in place some grantor trust income tax kind of flow through, and as these prices of the assets appreciate, we're able to mitigate a lot of estate tax and capital gains tax simultaneously, with assets in personal name and in trust kind of coinciding together. So that is one of the major things that we set up, and I've very much appreciated working with Digital Wealth Partners in Anchorage. They've been very good to fine-tune their tools. The way in which your custody, the way in which your brokerage allows you to set up your account and who has authority over it makes a significant impact on how your trust functions for tax purposes. Possession and enjoyment and control are the tests for most tax. So if you think about that, make sure you've got careful custody and careful control over your assets. So very careful to choose your service providers and the structure you set them into. Excellent. Any closing thoughts before we let you off stage and into the wild?
Preston.
Final thought I have, if I can just add a little more to my wish list. Many of you know me. I love decentralized autonomous organizations. They are going to be one of the major types of distributed actors that is going to ultimately help us to create new forms of economic cooperation in the end. And in the area of DAOs, I've been working on trying to get lawmakers to put in place some uniform law. I've put out some proposals there. I've been trying to get a few tax clarifications on those as well, as far as both securities, banking, as far as taxation laws. There's a number of things with DAOs that are problematic still, but we are working towards them and starting to kind of pilot these DAOs. But you'll find that for the family office context, the reason we're working on these is they are an excellent and tax-efficient alternative to purpose trusts. And I think you'll see that the design of family offices is going to be swamped by the decentralized autonomous organization for anyone trying to achieve continuity of the legacy for more than a couple generations. The DAO will be a superior solution, and it's wrought by the distributed ledger technology. So we go working to kind of forge ahead on that path. Hopefully the regulators will listen to the proposals there. I won't trouble you with them, but thanks for your attention today.
Road day.
Hey, sir, just a few closing thoughts. So just taxpayer, thinking about the ways that you could potentially mitigate taxes. You have qualified accounts that you could potentially be contributing to. A lot of people don't know that. So you can buy your digital assets inside of an IRA. This could be any type of IRA. It could be self-directed. It could be a Roth. So just some thoughts there if you haven't ever looked at that. And then we're also at the forefront of the insurance policies. This is something else, a way that you could, potentially purchase assets inside of your insurance policy, be able to trade those tax-free over the long term or borrow against the cash value of that life insurance using different strategies. We're currently working on private placement life insurance for that application and have partners in place for that. So anyway, a lot of things on this front that are still unknown, but we're definitely blazing the trail at Digital Ascension Group and Digital Wealth Partners alongside Rust and Deal here. So thank you again. Appreciate y'all coming out.
All righty, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Give a round of applause. Thank you. All righty. Let's dive into all things legal and policy. Kicking it off with you, Elizabeth. When you think about what makes a place welcoming for crypto innovation, what's something that really matters to builders and communities on the ground that policy conversations sometimes miss?
Great. That's a great question. When policy experts discuss digital asset innovation, they're often focusing on these high-level frameworks, compliance, things like that. And I think something that gets missed for the sake of the builders is more of the day-to-day ease of experimenting and iteration and how important that environment is to being able to innovate. Blockchain technology, it's software, right? So a lot of the Web3 companies, if not most of them, are software companies. So it's really important for the builders of these software companies to have an environment where they're able to test ideas out and launch pilots and iterate really quickly, pivot quickly based on community feedback. This is really critical that they're able to do this in a really quick way and have the freedom and that movement to be able to do that. And especially more so for an environment that's so new, where we are still innovating every day and it's so experimental. This is really critical. And I'm not saying that in order to experiment, we need not to have laws, but there is still this shadow of regulation by enforcement where developers every day are having to look over their shoulder and worry about that every time they pivot or make an update. And that environment is really the antidote to innovation, right? And our industry is built on open source software, and something most people don't know is 99% of the world's software is open source, and even more so Web3. And that is really the pinnacle of innovation and collaboration. And if you look at what has happened with the last reign of the SEC, our open source software representation in the US went from 40% to 20%. And that is super troubling and is the result of the environment that software developers have been in during this time. So we really need to get back to an environment that gives them confidence and that gives them a safe harbor to be able to innovate and experiment so that we can get back to being a leader internationally in the space. Things like when the DeFi broker rule were overturned. How when really important events happen in history, you remember where you are. I remember where I was at a developer conference, and the result of that was incredible. There was such a relief. I have friends who've been to jail because of open source software that they created that was good software that was used by bad actors. And it's crazy that this is happening because you have to ask, if that software didn't have the label blockchain or crypto on it, right? And the legislators just had to look at what is a software for and what does it do? Would they be prosecuting the developers like this? And history says no. So things like this, where you're giving developers the freedom to be able to innovate and create.
Shifting gears, David had the opportunity to eavesdrop this morning in the downstairs lobby. You were discussing about navigating the financial landscape, dealing with broker dealers, and these certifications are required for X, Y, and Z. Do you mind discussing some of the compliance issues that you're having to navigate at Compliers?
Yeah, so my introduction to blockchain, distributed ledger, crypto was not being crypto enthusiast. It was more being a compliance expert with FINRA, SEC rules, state rules. And all of a sudden, my intro into crypto came when I met a specific person and he was looking for a broker dealer. And so how it merged into my world was, people want to buy sell button. They want to buy an equity. They want to expand. They have X number of users. Let's find a way to get into the US equities marketplace. And that's really was my entry to crypto in the bridge. What you can think of is, I'm a pilot, a sailor. I try to think of traditional standard ways people can understand something. But think about a motorcycle and a sidecar. What I usually am in the fintech Web 2.3 world is, a sidecar. People have a main business, they have a technology, and now they want to integrate it into the financial world. And some of the things we heard on the earlier panels were the difference between a lot of regulation or a little bit of regulation. And for me, that's not a difference because we live in the regulated world. And being in this group, I can say by some of the sponsors who I know and just working with the Digital Ascension Group and Digital Wealth Management RIA, compliance forward. And for this group and this panel and the things you're hearing to merge and to bridge the gap between what the FINRA and the SEC need, it's a bar that may be higher than what is expected in a distributed ledger and in the places we play. But the risk of the regulation coming in, one of the beauties of the world I live in, like that's actually a non-material conversation for the group that I work with here, because when the regulation comes in, that's actually could be probably the best thing that could happen to me, at least. And to this group, it's a non-change or non-material effect because we have that expertise. We feel like it's going to go that direction. And ultimately, it's about having a culture. I think when I first came into compliance about 20 years ago, it was because of family. I wanted to be a lawyer, but I'm a terrible student. I don't like reading. So compliance was easier. So I went into compliance. And the first conference I went to, I met Mary Shapiro and she told me, do everything like you're raising your right hand and it's up on a screen somewhere and some lawyers are watching you. And then do everything else. If you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And if you go on with some of these fundamental rules that we've learned in the securities world, a couple of the stories I like from the panelists earlier, they mentioned the 40 Act. Like a lot of what I do is finding something that's pigeons and smoke signals and rules from 1940 and 42, and I'm analyzing and making those work for new age companies. And I think that's a really good. The only other thing was, the McDonald's or whatever, the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken, he went bankrupt. He founded it when he was 42 years old. And when he sold Kentucky Fried Chicken, he sold it for $2 million. And his secretaries made more than him because he didn't believe in the financial markets. And it was sold for $420 million a few years later. So this crowd is the crowd that's ahead of Colonel Sanders, right? We see the future. We see where it's going.
On the topic of regulatory uncertainty, let's peel back the onion a little bit deeper, if you guys don't mind. What does that really mean? You kind of touched on this a moment ago, as far as you're leveraging, if you don't mind, David, that you're leveraging 1940s laws for current technology and solutions of modern day. What do you think it's going to take to alleviate or remove this regulatory uncertainty? Obviously, sound regulations. Anything that we can do in the interim until we see them come into the fold?
Accomplish what we want on the front end, on the interaction side. You can have smoke signals and you can have messenger pigeons, and old school is the best fix for new school in the regulatory sense. So when you look at the regulatory environment, when I did the first blockchain-based security in Closer, when I did the first blockchain-based security for Patrick Byrne T0, and back then we just used the back end, like a transfer agent, and on the front it looked really slick, and it was really slick. It was a landmark moment. But when you think about what we were offering to the marketplace in 2016, I'm not good with dates, however long ago, versus what we were complying with in the regulatory space, sometimes it takes some things to comply that are actually really valuable. And if you talk to the compliance is annoying. So, but when the SEC comes and audits us, like it's really true. We had to deal with that stuff today, and it's always something random. But when you get audited, I think it's a good function.
Mind if I chime in on that a little bit? Yeah. So, we always hear about this moniker of regulatory uncertainty and regulation by enforcement, but what does that really look like on the ground? And to Ray's question, how do we actually go about solving some of these issues? And I think it really starts with having builders in this space engage with our policymakers. And we've been trying to do that for a number of years in this space. I know a lot of people have been building and doing things for years, but it's finally starting to take hold. We're starting to see actual real conversations and real policy be developed at the federal level, at the state level, because I think now crypto has actually really matured. I remember even just, a short time ago, a lot of the advocacy groups were not really around in this space and they weren't well funded. But this past election cycle, crypto really kind of came and made their voice heard, right? In the ballot box, along with funding for different causes in this space. So I think we're starting to finally see that. And I think the more we engage with people who are really building in this space and policymakers, that's really the opportunity to move the ball forward.
Kicking it over to you, Jeremy. What are your thoughts of this regulatory uncertainty? Being a new school attorney, do you think those old school rules are fitting? What are your thoughts?
I think, too, what's been sort of talked about so far is that I think a lot of folks are scared to get involved in the process. Legislators want partnerships. It might not seem like that way on TV or the way they talk on social media, but the reality is they want people to talk to. They want the folks in this room to engage with them, to tell them how to be regulated. So serving on commissions, volunteering your time, you have to involve yourself in those things. I'll give a little quick example. It's not related to digital currency, but there was a mission to kind of redo the bar exam in California. And they wanted to get rid of the bar exam. And it was like, well, that's not great. We need to have some regulation and some barometer as to whether what's a good lawyer or not. And maybe the test needs to change a little bit. But the things are comparable, right? You need some regulation. And so I got involved in the process and served on that commission, was able to guide that process and say, this is what we should do and what we should not do. In terms of practicalities, I think there's probably three things to look at. If you're drafting contracts, right? I'm a contracts and IP lawyer. You're going to want to make sure that if you're doing these sort of digital contracts, make sure to sort of back it up with a printed copy, and make sure that anytime you're doing these digital contracts, you're making sure that the people actually know what they're signing, and that they're assenting to the terms, right? So just because it's online doesn't mean it changes any of that. You still have to follow the law. The other part is that because there's so much uncertainty in what's going on, you want to build, anytime you're doing a contract and you're doing a deal, there's always this balance between ambiguity and certainty. Sometimes ambiguity is a good thing, right? And that can be good for your client. So in this day and age, and specifically with this industry, you have to build in, so for example, maybe your force majeure clause says something about regulation, and how if some massive regulation comes in, that could affect the contract. Maybe it cancels it, or maybe it changes it. Maybe it brings the parties back to the table. You have to think about those things. And again, I think the last thing I'll say is this, is I think flexibility is very key in this time, because you're sort of dealing with state by state laws, international law, federal law, and we live in a friendly administration now, but we don't know what's going to happen in 4 years. So building those contracts is going to be very important. So maybe those contracts don't last longer than 4 years. But anyway, I'll stop right there.
So on the topic of how do we navigate this time of uncertainty as a digital asset company, I mean, of course, the easy answer is go hire a really good lawyer, which is very expensive, though, and a lot of startups don't have that liberty. So I would say there are really practical things that we can do to navigate this time of uncertainty. One, you touched on a little bit, but join industry associations, right? There is strength in numbers. And the whole point of these industry associations is to represent your interest If you're a member of one of them, they're going to work with you, understand your needs. They're going to lobby for your interests. They're going to advocate for you. So, especially these state associations, they bring all of the state companies together and bring that to the Capitol and say, here are the needs of our companies. This is a really effective way to get your voice heard. And I would say, sandboxes, right? Sandboxes is a really practical way for you to operate in an environment where you're testing out new products, but you're getting live input directly from your regulators. And this is a really effective way to safely test out new ideas. And then I would say what you said, engage your regulators, especially at the state level. They are eager to hear from you. They're eager to get your response and your feedback on drafts of their bills to find out how that matches up with the needs of your business. And then they're eager to learn from you as an industry expert, right? So I would say advocate for yourself and collaborate and take these opportunities.
Closing this panel up, it would be great, given the understanding of this regulatory uncertainty. I'd like to know from each of you, starting with you, Rick, what gives you hope for the direction of the digital asset sector given this current circumstance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I've been in this space for a little over 10 years, which feels like an eternity. And the progress that we've made as a space now, between going from our infancy of barely being able to have a conversation with one or two congressmen or senators about digital assets, to now having full-blown trade associations that are advocating for crypto and blockchain-related causes, we're seeing that happen now in real time. But it's not even just what's happening in DC. We're seeing it happen at the state level. So, my colleague here, Elizabeth, and I, we sit as chapter presidents for Stand With Crypto, and we're seeing that even at the state level in Indiana, in Ohio, and in Michigan, states are becoming a lot more interested in digital assets. How can they study the technology to improve, government efficiencies? How can we allocate maybe state funds towards from IRAs for retirement groups to start getting an allocation in crypto? We're starting to finally see these conversations, take hold. And I think when you start to really see builders and legislators and a lot of other stakeholders come to the table and actually understand the tech, that's how you really move the ball forward. But what I would challenge a lot of the practitioners in this space, and I know some of my attorney cohorts would get mad about what I'm about to say here, is we really thrive actually in an environment where there is regulatory uncertainty, because then me as a practitioner, you're going to come to me for the answers. You're going to bill me for a bunch of hours, and you may still get kind of a gray answer. And I think in some ways, some attorneys, not all of them, because there's a lot of great attorneys who do want regulatory clarity, but some of them don't want it. And so I think now that we actually understand where the space is heading, we understand the tech, our legislators understand the tech, and even our regulators understand the tech. So when we have all of those three pieces in the mix, we can really move the ball forward now. And I think that's what gives me confidence for the future in this space.
First of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a great crowd. So I guess what I would say, what sort of makes me happy about the current situation is that we've been here before. We've constantly had to reinvent ourselves. Financial markets change all the time. And I think that the beauty of where we're at now is that somebody told me recently that nothing is really new. It's just recreated in a new format. And it's funny because now we have access to all that information through AI communications. So as bad as social media may seem sometimes, it's a great way to communicate and share knowledge. And so I think now is the time where we can actually develop something and communicate. And we have really too much information. So I think I'm sort of excited about the prospect that we've done this before. I think we can do it again.
It's a great answer. Thank you. I would say what gives me hope, and Rick touched on this a little bit, but is a new level of receptiveness that we are seeing from legislators. And part of that is due to advocacy organizations like Stand With Crypto, right? So Stand With Crypto's objective is to give every builder, every business owner, every crypto user a voice on Capitol Hill. And we are seeing an unprecedented amount of receptiveness when we are reaching out to legislators. And we're really wanting to connect communities to the federal level and to the state level. So we're really seeing that turnaround, and it's super refreshing to see that, especially unfold these last few months. And then the second sign I would say is something I heard Majority Whip Tom Emmer say in a Fireside chat. He said, you can measure success by how people are participating, right? And the amount of people coming into a system. And the past few months, the amount of companies that I have seen come back to the US because they're seeing signs of hope is so encouraging. So it's not just a little bit of optimism, it's actually happening.
I guess following that's hard. I don't know if it was what gives you confidence or what gives you hope, but in a time of regulatory uncertainty, I think you can look back in history and you can acknowledge what momentum means. And when you look around this group, for me, being in the compliance role, it's not about what new rules come out or don't come out. We're going to do it compliant no matter what. It's about the momentum in the right directions. And there's lots of people in the industry that I deal with or I know that they have a plan, they have a dream. Everything's new and this is all great. But I think when you look around this crowd and you look at Anchorage and Digital and everyone here, we're talking about regulated entities. I mean, we talk about rules every week. I'm so much fun, aren't I? When I have to bring my women in, they're even worse. So at least when I have to deal with it, it's usually good. But when you think about the confidence or the hope of the industry, I think it's the people that are from a diverse background, that are following a good group of intellectual leaders that are going to go out and give you good results. Working with this group, I've worked with a lot of groups as a consultant, and this group, you and everyone else, when they come in, a lot like everyone else with one caveat. Oh, this is the problem we have right now when it comes to securities, and we're going to do all of that. And I just remember I was like, well, if you do all of that, I promise you're good. And they're one of the few that they did it all. And so, when you look at the sponsors, when you look at the people on the panel, when you look at the legal and tax and every representative up here, we're all professionals. And this is an environment where you're getting access to those, regulated people. And so whether or not it's regulation, what gives me hope and what makes me confident is actually the regulation. So.
All righty, guys, let's give a round of applause for panel number 3. Thank you very much, guys and gals.
Okay, as I was saying, I'm going to stand unlike the panelists because my energy is very high right now. I'm very excited to be here. I was here last September, and it's an even bigger crowd this year, which is fantastic. So I, as is mentioned, I'm the managing director of the wealth management platform at Anchorage Digital, and I thought I would start tonight by talking a little bit about who Anchorage Digital is. You've heard the name about 1 million times so far tonight, so you're probably wondering, not a household name, what do you actually do? So Anchorage, a little bit of background about the firm. We were founded in 2017 by 2 engineers, Nathan McCauley and Diogo Monica. We are a relatively large player in the crypto space today, but we're still a private company. Our backers include Andreessen Horowitz, Visa, KKR, Apollo, Goldman Sachs, among others. So one of the things I like to do when I talk a little bit about Anchorage is explain a little history about Nathan and Diogo, because it helps you understand the why this business was created in the first place. So they are engineers by trade, and their backgrounds and expertise are in encryption and cryptography. And if you do a little internet sleuthing after the event today, you'll find out they were some of the earliest employees at Square. And they built most of the security infrastructure at Square. You'll find their tasks and accomplishments there were memorialized, as they both hold about a dozen patents each from that period of time. After they transitioned away from that company through the big success that took place there, they did similar work at a company called Docker that did quite a bit of work for in open source environment for the U.S. government, for the military. And while this was happening, they were based in Silicon Valley. And so they're there in 2014, 2015, 2016. And this is the time when crypto is starting to come more into the fore. So they have a lot of friends in the area. They have entrepreneurs that begin approaching them and sort of sheepishly admitting, I have a lot of digital assets. I don't know how to keep them safe, and I don't know what to do with them. And so as they started to assess the crypto custody landscape, what they realized is that investors are faced with a bit of a conundrum that frankly still exists today. On the one hand, you can keep assets in an exchange, possibly in a hot wallet. I think this audience is likely well aware there's a considerable amount of risk if you do that. So your other alternative is what we call cold storage. And cold storage is, of course, safer than a hot wallet, but it represents numerous other risks that are not there with an exchange. Namely, it's slow as part of the trade-off, and there are other potential access problems. And Nathan and Diogo, as they were assessing the landscape, getting more of these requests, they realized we could actually start a business because we don't think that this trade-off needs to exist. And that is how Anchorage was born. Now, in addition to standing up a unique security model at Anchorage, one of the other things that they sought out from the very beginning was they wanted to be a tier one partner to institutions. To do that, you cannot only have a good product. You have to be regulated in order to work with the largest financial institutions in the world. And so we went down the path of a nearly impossible task about 5-6 years ago, where we became a chartered bank. We applied for a federal charter. As you might imagine, there were a lot of powerful people in very high places that did not want this to happen for multiple reasons. But it did happen. Against all odds, we got that charter. And as it stands today, we remain the only federally chartered, OCC-regulated digital asset custodian in the country. So this is a very exciting time for the firm. Now, I will tell you at a very high level a little bit about what Anchorage does. Historically, our business catered to hedge funds, venture capital firms, foundations. We have a very large pre-launch protocol business. But in recent years, we've also started to stand up what we call a financial institutions group, and that's part of the group that I'm in. And this group has a number of sub-verticals. We have a collateral management group within Anchorage as part of FIG. We have a internal network called Atlas, which is an internal settlement network. We do ETF custody for a number of asset managers, and of course the wealth management business that I operate, which caters to banks, RIAs, broker-dealers, family offices, and financial technology platforms. So now that you know a little bit about what Anchorage does, I want to transition to talking a little bit about the emergence of this new asset class. You've heard from a lot of the other panelists about how we're starting to see institutional adoption. And one of the things that I thought would be interesting to talk about is the fact that this isn't exactly new. New asset classes do emerge. It's not common, but it does happen. And I think it would be interesting to touch on some of that history. And I'm going to go all the way back to the 70s to start this discussion. So if you think back to the 1970s, there were a group of people that left Bear at that time, and they started something called a bootstrapped acquisition fund. And the reason it was called that was because at the time, nobody talked about something that we call today a leveraged buyout or private equity. But that bootstrapped acquisition fund was the very early days of what we now all commonly recognize as private equity. If you think about the 80s, we had the early days of another asset class that eventually emerged and became commonplace. So back then, you had what was considered a untouchable investment in non-investment grade bonds. Eventually, they started to be called fallen angels, and then they were referred to as junk bonds. But by the time I got into the industry in 2012, any software allocation that you used to put a portfolio together, we referred to those as high yield bonds, and they were a staple in nearly every single portfolio. And if you think about the 90s and the savings and loan crisis, what was born out of that was alternative credit, private credit, private debt. And so while not common, the emergence of new asset classes does happen. And we are seeing that absolutely right now with digital assets. I think the difference, and you're always careful to say this time is different, but I think the difference with digital assets is, in addition to being an asset class, there's this underlying layer of technology that can really power the entire financial system as the new rails. And I think that's what everybody in this room is truly excited about at the end of the day. So as I think about this asset class, I'm going to sort of rewind over the last 18 months and talk a little bit about where we see the institutional adoption and some of the unique places that we see it at Anchorage. So I think everybody knows that ETFs were launched at the beginning of last year. These ETF launches were arguably the most successful launches in history. So it's a very exciting time to see that occur. And if you fast forward to today, we're seeing a flurry of activity in the space. You have companies like Stripe buying cryptocurrency infrastructure. You have Bank of America talking about getting involved in stablecoins.
You have Ripple that just purchased Hidden Road, which is a very, very interesting acquisition. And for those of you that may still follow the stock market closely, and the last two earnings calls, Charles Schwab's new CEO has made it very clear that they will enter the digital asset space inside of the next 12 months. At Anchorage, we have a unique seat given our regulated status where we are regularly talking with very large financial institutions about how they can enter the space and partner with us. And I'll draw attention to two recent announcements that are public today. One took place about 2 months ago, where we announced a very large Bitcoin lending facility with Cantor Fitzgerald and Copper. And earlier this month, we actually announced that we've been approved as a custodian for BlackRock for their existing ETF products and future products that they will launch. So it is very clear at this time that we have entered a new stage in terms of digital asset adoption. And I think the reality is the winners that will come out of this are the companies, and you've heard a lot of this on the other panels already, they're the companies that are going to be able to operate in that traditional financial regulated environment and the scale of that environment by combining that with digital assets, programmability, its efficiency, and its ability for reach. So what I wanted to wrap up a little bit with today is to talk a little bit more about the wealth management platform that I operate, and to highlight how we partner with firms like Digital Wealth and why I'm so excited about what it is that they're doing. So about 2 years ago, in sort of classic trying to skate to where the puck is going fashion, we made a decision internally to build out a wealth platform. And the point of this wealth platform is to provide an access ramp for those banks, RIAs, broker-dealers to onboard their firms to the platform to access digital assets, to onboard their end investors, fund accounts, trade those accounts. And an awful lot of what we've been focused on, the really difficult parts of this, are some of the things you've heard in previous panels. It's the tracking of taxes. It's the building out of the bank ledger and the complexity around how all of this works. One of the very first things that I did when I got to Anchorage is I stood up IRA administration in-house. I think Jake touched a little bit about on this earlier. Through Anchorage, with no third-party involvement at all, you can open an IRA. You can roll 401k assets to an IRA. You can open a Roth. You can do a Roth conversion. You can do a backdoor Roth IRA. Not only can you do that with Anchorage, we do all of the tax reporting on that today. You heard Rustin talk about 1099 DA coming out next year. We are already prepared to issue those tax documents. So we have a rather advanced and mature wealth platform, but we have a lot more to build. And that sort of leads me into our partnership with Digital Wealth and why I'm very excited about what they're doing. I started my career in 2002, and I was an advisor myself for about 10 years. I know that side of the business very well. And what I'm observing in the space today is probably the largest spread or divergence between firms that are adopting technology and delivering that personalized advice that consumers demand at this point, and firms that are stuck in their tracks. They're sticking to old ways. They're not looking at new asset classes. Digital wealth is the very definition of being on the forefront of what people are demanding and bringing people to that table where they can access investments in a way that they haven't been able to do before. In addition to that, I think one of the things that's interesting about the way that they're doing that is they're not taking a blanket approach. They're not simply gathering assets and sort of giving blanket advice to all of their clientele. As you've heard in some of the previous panels, they are introducing them to innovative fund structures, option strategies over top of their existing investments, showing clientele all different manners that they can generate yield. And then they're combining this with very sophisticated financial advice. What are the legal structures that these accounts are held in? And ultimately, all this points to goals that everybody in this room has, things like retirement or building generational wealth. So I'm very, very excited about the partnership from that perspective. So what I'd like to close with is this. As I mentioned, I started my career in 2002. I was an advisor for about 10 years, sold my practice in 2012. And among the many things that I learned over that period of time, there's two that I'd share. One is you cannot build and operate a successful advisory practice without the right internal and the right external partners. And the second thing that I learned is what a profound positive impact you can have on people's lives in that seat. And so it is an absolute privilege and honor for me to be supporting advisors now in a very different way than the way that I used to work. I am incredibly excited about what we'll be able to do with Jake and the team. I think we have a long way to go, But to say I'm optimistic is an understatement. I do believe we'll get there, and I think Digital Wealth is the type of firm that will emerge very much as a leader of the new wealth ecosystem that is being built out. So that's all I've got. I appreciate the time, and very good to be here.
Alrighty, gentlemen, let's kick things off. As sophisticated phishing, social engineering risk attacks are increasing and kidnappings are on the rise, lost fingers, people in general, what emerging defense mechanisms or protocols do you see as most promising for institutional and retail protection? Let's kick it off with you, Charles, all the way at the end.
Well, thank you. Great question. One of the issues that we look at, of course, privacy services for high net worth individuals and people with assets and problems that we solve for them. I'm really excited to hear today all the talk about custodial solutions. If you don't want to lose a digit over your cryptocurrency, the best way to prevent that is to not have it, right? If you have entrusted it into a third party, it kind of goes a little bit against the ethos, of course, of crypto, not your keys, not your coin, but okay, fine. So there is a raft right now of violence against cryptocurrency holders. Tend to be pretty public. Whether you are actually representing accurately your amount of wealth or not, that nuance is lost on the criminals. And so there's a lot of opportunities for them to visit violence upon you in exchange for your funds, real or imagined. And so, yeah, I'm really excited by the amount of different custody options. That's been one of the biggest, with the regulation, the lack of good custody options have forced us to take matters into our own hands with crypto for good and bad. So I think I like the custody options.
So we see it manifesting in a lot of different ways. I wish it was just relegated to self-custody. Certainly, though, we see it in custodial situations as well. I think that, there's really a comprehensive approach that one needs to take. And that includes, things like not talking about your net worth online or falsifying your net worth online. For as funny as that is, people get targeted with AI as prolific and really as advanced as it is. For those of you who don't know, we find botnets, agentic botnets on Twitter. We find funnels, phishing funnels, so limiting your exposure online and not talking about your wallets and what you have is typically a good kind of best practice. But, it takes a comprehensive approach. And one of the things that we've been focusing on recently is, what happens when the worst case happens, right? How do you go after it? How do you get it? People in the room, I'm sure, have known people or have been subject to themselves. And so what we've got it very, very proficient at, and we've worked with Jake and Ray and a bunch of other people around the crypto sphere, is really what happens when that worst case happens. And so, we've got a number of products, and there are certainly people in the market that have these products, but that focus on the freezing, working with law enforcement around the world, that recovery, Chainalysis is a huge partner of ours. And so, we deploy custodial solutions, insured custodial solutions. We deploy, self-custody solutions. We do it almost exclusively in segregated, wallet versus omnibus wallet is just attack vector specific. But really, we see the kind of the comprehensive look at what happens, post-fraud. How do you get that money back? Because inevitably it is happening, and it's happening at large scale.
Thank you for having me. So I think a big point of vulnerability, especially if you're a high net worth person in this space, is telegraphing your movements. If you're attending conferences, if you're attending events, posting that on social media makes you a target. If you're going to travel, best practices, don't travel with devices that access your crypto. That's another huge point of failure. And a huge tip for everyone in this room, if you've got your seed phrase on your device, you are vulnerable. If that's in your notes, if that's in photos, all that's in the cloud and easily accessible to scammers. So always have an air gap between your devices and you when you're traveling, because that puts one more layer of security.
On the topic of being a public figure and trying to echo these new and emerging solutions and philosophies, it's how do you not be public and so being personal about this or taking advantage? How would someone like me then find balance between security and this new emerging employment or business opportunities?
I think the first thing is common sense, spatial awareness. Know your surroundings. Watch your six. Know who's watching you. Have that awareness, because a lot of times people are lost in the moment and don't see that they are on the verge of being victimized. These are coordinated efforts. They're called wrench attacks. It's an ugly word. It's blunt, but that's exactly what it is. These are not sophisticated people for the most part. They are just opportunistic people. So the best practice is to mitigate against opening yourself up to those opportunities. Many ways that you can do that, but if you're high visibility, if you're in this sector, you're going to telegraph your movements because that's part of your living. So that's where it's on you to be vigilant about awareness of your surroundings.
Yeah, awareness of where you hold your assets, just, how they're regulated, what they're doing, what partners they have. We even see technologies commoditized nowadays. So, you can literally jump into an Uber and plug into a cord that's got a device to read. And with the type of vulnerabilities, I could go into vulnerabilities. We won't go that deep, but, there's been some JavaScript vulnerabilities in the JavaScript VM that allows for things to happen. So, I think it's definitely a good practice to, to some degree to spread asset allocation. I think it's good to, when in public, especially when you're traveling as a public figure, to not, put your device into situations, like you said, keep it air gapped, keep your big holdings air gapped, and utilize multi-factor to the best extent possible. A lot of these custodial solution and even other solutions, they have multi-factor components to them. There's no way to really eliminate all the risks, I think is a really important thing too. You can just minimize them. Just like I want to caveat this by saying we work with banks. We provide payment systems and pay. Guys, this is happening in banks too, right? The thing that makes this new solution really cool, to me at least, because we're living it right now, is when a fraud happens in a bank, I can't call that bank and then say, where did it go? And then call the next bank and say, where? We actually have the opportunity now to much more quickly pinpoint, hone in, freeze, mobilize, recover, and go back to normal, right? And there are even new, manifestations of kind of chain configurations that allow for blacklisting of wallets. So these systems are becoming more robust, right? I think they're already, in my view, with what we've done and what we've been a part of, they're already as good as traditional banking rails. We're doing things that you can't do with traditional banking rails. We just had a congressman in our office today, right before this. We just, we're talking with the Fed chair. This is stuff that they understand. So I want to caveat everything we're saying up here, not to put fear into you, but to actually give you some insight into how to remain more secure and have some real love for the future, because it's going to be great.
That's a lot of optimism. Always. Three quick thoughts. When you said the worst thing that could happen, I kept thinking to myself, okay, is that like a whole hand, or like you lose the rest of your family, or just you lose your money? Okay. All of it. So what I think is fascinating about crypto is you've got both sides of the spectrum, right? We've got the wrench attack, where you have what we would expect from a violent, unsophisticated criminal. What do you do to defend yourself against that? What do you look like when you get Googled? How easy is it to find your address? How easy is it to find all the pictures that you post of your kids and your family and where to go to school, and you still have your awesome pictures of the inside of your house from the last Zillow posting, so I know exactly how to operate around your house when I go to kidnap you and take some of your fingers and all that good stuff.
Or your voice, AI recreations of your voice.
Or your voice or your face or all the other things like that. So on one hand, you've got the violent, unsophisticated. On the other hand, and this is where I really am interested in and fascinated with, you've got the most sophisticated actors in the world, whether they are Russian cyber criminals or North Korean state hackers. They're literally funding their nation state and their weapons of mass destruction program based on stealing our crypto, right? And that's everything from a straight up theft to stealing the Slack space on your computer that you're not using and cryptojacking, using your computer to mine cryptocurrency for them and every little part in between. And so as I tell people, whether you care about your family and protecting yourself or whether you care about your country, international security, there's a reason to protect your crypto and to be smart with what you're doing.
It sounds like it's almost this is an industry within itself, coming from the insurance sector, selling liability policies, crime and cyber. The underwriters that I've had the opportunity to break bread with, we're just talking about the level of resources that some of these entities have and how they're deploying these at scale all over the world. Do you mind talking what you guys are seeing on this front and how you guys aspire to combat these vulnerabilities?
So 2 points on that. Number one, as a criminal defense lawyer for almost 30 years, been deep in the trenches in handling financial crimes, I'm becoming an expert on the term. It's a very crass term. It's called pig butchering. There are warehouses full of people in Nigeria working around the clock on the phone, trying to capture vulnerable people, usually elderly people, usually single elderly women, in romance scams, and then enticing them into investment scams, showing them fake returns, and then when it comes time to collect their fake crypto returns, throwing all kinds of obstacles in the way. There's a tax you got to pay. There's a fee you got to pay. Send me more money, and they bleed them dry. That's why it's that crass term, pig butchering. I want to give a real-world example that happened today. Very influential friend of mine in the crypto space, hosts newsletters and talk forums, huge following, had to post the embarrassing news that he got a call from an investigator, and this has been reported in the crypto news cycle. He was advised by a private investigator that one of his clients had been scammed for $4 million based on a deep fake of this influencer. They went to the extent of deep faking his identity, his driver's license, his wife's identity, his children's identity, to prove to the suspect that was being duped that they were the actual person. They social engineered their way in. So the biggest point of failure, I hate to tell you, is you. You've got to be very careful, especially now in this world of AI. AI has the ability now to replicate voice, face. They can get on Zoom conversations with you, and you think you're talking to a person who is not the person you're talking to. And it's that sophisticated. So you've got to be nimble, and you've got to be very vigilant, because in every scam, whether it's North Korea, whether it's the Nigerians in the warehouse, the biggest point of failure is always going to be you.
Yeah. What was the question again? Man, I was like, well, that's it. So what are we doing to help protect?
To reduce these vulnerabilities.
So, I think I love what Anchorage was saying about their founding team. I think it's very important for people to, this is a very technology-based environment. Everything's going digital. And it's really reassuring when you hear about those kind of people building these kinds of tools, because that's what it takes to stay ahead, right? Even in traditional banking, if you look at the people building the banking software over the last 40 years, but we've seen both, right? We've seen the good and the bad and in between. And I think, the partners who are, built around the core technologies. I think this is why the Anchorage Digitals of the world will win out over the Chases of the world. I think there's going to be a whole new breed of what we're seeing is an evolution of finance right now. There's going to be a whole new layer built, not a side layer. It's going to replace some of the banks. I'm not going to say names, but there's a whole new infrastructure being built on technology, trust, distribution, decentralization, and it takes a whole new way of thinking. You almost can't re-engineer I know I work with all these banking cores. You almost can't re-engineer the existing system. You just got to build a new system and work with that until you can work the cost that they sunk into that system out of the equation. It can take 20, 30, 40 years. This is what the cycles. I think this next commodity cycle of technology is going to be about increasing the pace at which, and that's why in the last, 15 years with Bitcoin, 16 years,
it's been such a fast evolution in this space. And think about some of the more novel technologies, even like smart contracts, only been around, 10 years, 9 years, 5 years. And look at the proliferation. So I think it's about, really embracing the people leading the space because they understand the space the best. And they're going to deliver this whole new financial infrastructure. I definitely think that there will be leaders. I think we see a lot of the community banks, we see a lot of the credit unions, cooperatives around the world, not just here, but around the world. International payments with Ripple. We've actually integrated Ripple. Here's some cool not integrated, but integrating. Yeah, can I get some claps? That's pretty cool. Into Ripple Pay, into our international settlement. And we're doing this because our ability to mitigate fraud, to see where money's coming from, to look at and put, smarter AIs on the data so that they can be as proactive as possible. Just on financial models alone, we have, we're deploying over 19 different AI models. So I think you have to embrace the technologies that are leading the space because again, traditional, Kyle Hopman, who's the chairman of the NCUA, he always says this thing that I think is great. He goes, if you think crypto is used for, wait until you hear about this thing called cash, and it's true, right? Eventually though, that won't be true. But eventually when we get to where a majority of the world's money is moving on these types of ledgers, the ability to stop, freeze, hold, pull back, mitigate, monitor, it's all going to be happening in real time, right? We were talking about the future of payments, and we could see a place where, you see somebody, you recognize them, they say, send me $10. You say yes, and your agentic just took that as a confirmation because you're wearing glasses that did biometrics. That's going to be how payments work in like 5 years. Wait, okay? So yeah, this is going to be the authentication, the real thing we need, right? And technology is going to allow us to be out there in person like this. We're going to need to use technology to combat technology. It's not going to be, we call it human powered AI is really what it's going to end up being, right? You're going to have all these agentic specialty trained things. So again, very optimistic, obviously, about the future, but we're literally living it. My team's here. You've experienced some of the stuff we've done. There's people here that have experienced some of the stuff we've done. And so, we're living it, and it's a really exciting future. So stay optimistic.
No, I love it. And I'm going to triangulate between the two. I love the technological solutions. I'm a huge fan of AI. I love agentic AI. I think there's a lot of great things that are going to happen. A lot of the AI helps protect ourselves from those external threats. I will say, though, I made a whole career on this, that you can put up as many cameras, fences, gates, technologies you want. I'm going to find and exploit the human weakness on your team. That's why I made the big bucks, and that's why I still make the big bucks. And so a couple of things I would just say. Pig butchering, worst name ever. If you're ever in a position to change that, please, because when you explain it to a victim, I'd like to say what's happened here. You were a victim of a romance scam and an investment scam, and we call it, pig butchering. And in this case, you are the pig that got fattened up and then killed. So otherwise, sorry, you lost all your money and don't have any money to pay me. But
conversation with grandma.
Oh, that's the worst. That's the worst. Okay. So the other thing I would say, as our last panel mentioned, some people really enjoy, lawyers enjoy working in a regulated space. Some enjoy working in an unregulated space, right? I tend to find still, and we've said this for years, that one of the limiting factors of crypto adoption is clear regulatory policy, right? It's going to keep the institutions on the sidelines. It's going to keep the professionals on the sidelines. It's going to be the Wild West until we get some laws. So one of the really cool things that I've done, and gosh, we've been doing this now for 5, 6, 7 years, and we provide is the really long, cumbersome, bespoke, discrete solutions for appropriate clients. And unfortunately, appropriate clients are people who have problems. And in an unregulated space, you've got to be able to reach out to people that deal in ambiguity and deal in unregulated space to resolve problems. And so I'm definitely going to need your card from the defense attorney perspective, because there's legal things to do, and then there's the other things that you have to do. The biggest part for me is education, knowledge, awareness. It is a dirty, nasty world, and if you don't believe you're living in a dirty, nasty world, then you're going to feel that dirty nastiness. I would much rather you know it ahead of time and be just a little more distrustful than to be on the other end of it and learn it the hard way. And then, sometimes bad things happen to good people, and then sometimes bad things happen to bad people, and sometimes you need someone to make those arrangements.
Okay, so closing thoughts. I would be remiss if I didn't say this to you. If you are using SMS text messaging as a factor authentication for anything that you're logging into, stop. Research what a SIM card swap is, and you'll see how fast your cell phone can be compromised. Unfortunately, most banks, and we need to talk about this, still use SMS verification, and they need to stop. Look at things like Google Authenticator. In closing, again, best practices, you've got to control from within. The scammers will take advantage of the low-hanging fruit. So if you have systems in place where you're not that low-hanging fruit, where you don't have your seed phrase, your password stored in your notes in the cloud, you're going to avoid a lot of these things. So just stay vigilant. And by all means, I publish a newsletter and talk a lot about this stuff. Give me a follow on the socials, and I'll be happy to keep educating you. Thank you.
No, thank you all for coming here tonight and sitting through this and learning about all this really cool stuff. Thank you, Ray and Jake, for having this, and Max. You guys do a fantastic job of putting this on. Generally I'm becoming more optimistic with just the capabilities overall. I still believe that 100% you got to stay vigilant. There is definitely this underbelly that's just horrendous, and we need to do our best to stomp it out in whatever ways you can. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think, focus on the people delivering really safe, secure, multi-factor. We do biometric scanning of the face in the wallet with the credit unions. I mean, multi-factor. And because of the way, compute is so commoditized now, technology is so commoditized now, really experience is going to win. So flock to the experiences that, give you those tools. Don't just flock to the next quick thing that's giving you $10 or $100. Use Anchorage Digital, use the right tools, find the right solutions, and I think you can remain fairly safe out there.
I agree with what they both said. I've been meaning to get back on this for a second. You don't have to be the fastest gazelle on the Serengeti. You just can't be the slowest. And, we used to say it in terrorism all the time. And so, there's a lot of slow gazelles out there. Holy smokes, a lot of limpers. Don't be a limper. Be faster. You don't have to be super fast. 1, 2, be optimistic. I think that the technology and what's driving here is giving us a lot of optimism, giving us back a lot of control, giving us back a lot of agency over our financial futures. It's awesome. If you're not optimistic being in this space, I don't know what you're doing in the space, right? Unless you're so pessimistic about the dollar and where other things are going. But that's another way to optimism, right? That's another way to optimism. Then the last one, I would say, be optimism, move fast, but occasionally stop and slow down. If somebody's pitching something to you and you don't exactly understand it, if it seems to be too good to be true, if you're a 4 and you know you're a 4 and she's a 10,
Come on, bro.
She's not in New York. She's not coming to see you because she doesn't have money. Don't do it. Be optimistic, but be careful. And have a Rolodex. There's a lot of people here with a lot of capabilities and a lot of skills and a lot of people that you should be exchanging cards with. And know who to call before you have a problem, because it costs more after.
So as Ray mentioned, we are going to be speaking about the convergence of institutions in DeFi. And I think I'd like to start the panel off with the question of how is blockchain innovating the traditional investment landscape? We can talk about tokenization. We can talk about DeFi, anything that the panelists wish to kind of bring up here for the intro of the panel. So Ken, why don't we start with you, because we were talking a little bit about tokenized money market funds. That could be an interesting way to kick off the panel.
Just talking about token money market funds. There's what I like to do is just start by talking about what tokenization is. Tokenization has actually evolved quite a bit here over the last few years, and I like to go back to talk about like when I was at Wells Fargo. we were tokenized. I was led a tokenization of repo, and when we were tokenizing repo, tokenization really we would repo is the exchange of fiat or cash for treasury, and so the treasury part of that was sitting at a tri-party account at BNY Mellon, and it was represented on chain, but the asset was not on chain, and then the fiat itself was sitting at in an account, but in a cash account, but it was and represented on chain, but it actually wasn't on chain. And I'm gonna wrap this up, but the and so because the assets were actually not on chain, what was happening there is you would have the transaction happen you'd have the swap of the treasury versus the cash, but then you would have to have all these processes that were actually more involved than if you never had blockchain to start with. And so what's kind of evolved and it's starting to evolve, and it's not quite there yet, is when you go from having assets parked somewhere else and have them represented on chain, then it starts opening up the power of blockchain. And so that's what's happened. That's what's starting to happen now. And you're starting to see companies like Fidelity, BlackRock, State Street, have all, and other companies have all over the past year have begun to tokenize money market funds, real world assets. Just as of today, represent $21 billion of assets, and on chain. And so what we're seeing now is these assets are more and more being the assets on chain, not necessarily being represented on chain, but being on chain. And so that's really, kind of an evolution that we're seeing. And it's not quite there. It's different in every single jurisdiction.
So who wants to discuss how blockchain is innovating the traditional investment landscape next?
Thanks so much for being here. Really excited to be here with this great community. It's unbelievable to see the turnout of this event. It's unbelievable to get the support from this community. Just so grateful, so stoked. I know it's getting a little late and there's been a lot of information thrown at you, but stay with me here. I had my first Red Bull in a really long time, so I am pumped. All right. I think it would be good to level set a little bit about what DeFi is, because it's often associated with Uniswap and SushiSwap and AMMs and a lot of crazy stuff. But when I think about DeFi, I really think about a financial ecosystem that's run by code instead of companies. So instead of banks controlling our financial ecosystem, it's programmatic smart contracts that anyone can participate in as long as they have access to the internet. In terms of how it's innovating institutional financial markets, I mean, it unlocks 24/7 trading, global liquidity, and a lot of other exciting things that drive diversification and increase the velocity of money. And that's what institutions are looking for. So it's a really exciting time to be part of this space.
Ben?
How is it transforming the landscape? I think we're seeing it every day. I've been in this space for about 7 years. I'm a little different. I represent a company that built our own blockchain from scratch. So we reinvented the way that we see the future of blockchain technology, which is not to bring Web3 into existing legacy banking industry, but bring Web3 technology into the banking existing databases. So we thought about it completely different. And with that, so was our mindset on how we would get massive adoption. With massive adoption, you can't talk about blockchain. You can't talk about these weird things called like DeFi and TradFi and stuff like that. You're talking about like security, your value proposition, things that we have to mature in this industry. And those are the things that I actually think without all the technology and the jargon that comes with it, it actually comes into simplifying the whole message. yes, tokenizing assets on chain creates 24/7 liquidity, like you said. It accesses more investors, speculators than we've ever seen before. These are fascinating evolutions that we haven't seen since 2001, when accredited investors came around and you had to mark that you made $250,000 or you had over $1 million in assets to be able to invest in alternative companies. Now we're unlocking a completely different persona. And I think that's the starting point that we kind of need to look at, like the aha, beyond the technology. I could sit here and talk about our technology all day long and it'd probably bore everybody in this room. But beyond that, like, it's unlocking a completely new customer base, a consumer base, a community sense of identity that we haven't seen for years outside of social media.
So I want to start this off by talking about a dichotomy between public and private adoption by institutions. And so I think public markets, you're seeing this really interesting treasury strategy where, crypto treasury by public companies. You saw this with Tesla, putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. You see it with MicroStrategy. And then you're seeing even more like new things happening, new developments just in the past couple of days. There's this 21, it's called 21. And they just raised like $3 billion to like compete with MicroStrategy in terms of like public investment in this crypto treasury strategy. And then there's another interesting deal that happened. That was a SPAC deal led by GSR. So GSR is a market maker in the crypto space. They're a really big player. They do a lot of deals, venture deals, and like they've worked with Ripple and like all sorts of things. So they let $100 million into this other Solana public crypto treasury SPAC. So it's like, exposure for people in public markets to get into these. And so it's really interesting pattern to see this develop. But also it's not like, Ken talked about, treasury, tokenized treasuries. And, and when we talk about public markets, it's all about exposure. And that's still just like getting on-chain exposure to like, treasury assets. And so at the technology layer, there's still a lot of work to be done there. And I don't think that the public markets are really geared to like take advantage of this. There's too much legacy like infrastructure, and it's going to take a lot of time to get that like ushering in the new rails for the public markets. But at the private market level, that's much easier to do. And that's where I think it begins. And it's not like what you need to do is you need to have companies adopting blockchain as the book of record. So once they use that as the primary book of record, and then you get the infrastructure at the private level, and then you get it rolling up into public markets, and that's just a natural progression in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you brought up 21, because that's like very recent news, and they're kind of competing with Strategy, which is also MicroStrategy's now Strategy. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out, knowing that there's like two of those happening now versus just Strategy. Do you have any thoughts on that, by the way?
You've got Michael Saylor at Strategy, who's been like the Bitcoin talking head, and then it's Jack Mallers, I think kind of like leading the 21, and he's like also another talking head. So it's really interesting, like to get the masses interested and like invested through this sort of like public market vehicle. And they're both like really good at it. But it's a pattern. So we'll probably see this happening more and more with different assets. So I'm just like interested to see who's following up.
On that note, I want to ask the panelists, what else do we need to see evolve before we'll see mainstream institutional adoption of DeFi products beyond just basic custody and trading?
I'll jump in there. I spend a lot of time lobbying now in DC, going there next week. I believe that this entire industry kind of missed the boat. We gave the middle finger to the government when we first started. We were like, we're just going to build normal tech, but we didn't realize that it would have a massive impact across like our everyday lives. And as a result, you had this backlash by the government when we saw new wealth created overnight. When you create new wealth, you're going to raise the attention of the government. So seeing where the pieces of the cards are falling now, you have to look at the government and actually starting to be the rock stars of the show. You got to give them the mic. We need to see the stablecoin legislation go through. I know Coinbase is coming back and saying, hey, we actually don't want this to pass. We want the market structure bill to go through. We want it to be an all-encompassing act, but we actually need some momentum in this space. And from what I've seen on the Hill, I'm very confident that this is a bipartisan effort going on, and we need to keep it that way, and it's happening, and they want to keep things cascading. There's so much funding into these politicians' campaigns that they're not just going to stop with the stable coin and be like, oh, we already did the crypto aspect. We're done now. We're not even going to look at the market structure bill. So we have to see this stable coin legislature go through for us to have more retail confidence in the space, have more institutions have confidence in the space. And then we'll do the market structure bill. And some of those nuances in the market structure bill, like decentralization, how do we identify node operators, how do we identify earnings, all of which I feel like they're already listening to, because I've met with them. I've met with other layer ones like myself. We all have the same issue, whether we're top 100 or top 300, we're all singing the same song. And so all of that has to happen. So I urge everybody to pay attention to the politicians right now. The younger politicians are taking the lead to really grab the mic and make a name for themselves, but this is impacting not only jobs, but our financial sovereignty.
Would love to build upon that. Something that's come up a lot today is the regulatory environment. And institutions are not going to adopt this space without a clear legal framework. They are not going to put their traditional businesses at risk to take a speculative play in this emerging market. It's just not going to happen. So that legal clarity is absolutely crucial for institutional adoption. The other thing I'd say is something Matt touched on a moment ago is the rails. So we need trustworthy infrastructure. We need trustworthy and well-built on-ramps and off-ramps for institutions to be able to utilize. Without that, I think it's going to be really hard for us to get adoption into this space.
Now, and I would just say another part of that, and I agree with both gentlemen here. The market structure bill and the stablecoin bill, and I believe both of those will pass by September. And the other thing that I think that needs to happen, and I do see it happening, is really just confidence in the process, and confidence, in the government. And so, I was, all of us were here 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago to exactly to the date where companies, outside the United States, just, full stop, we're not coming, had plans to come into the United States. They weren't coming in the United States. They paused that. And there were actually even worse. There were companies inside the United States that were looking to flee, Coinbase being one of them, because you mentioned Coinbase just a minute ago. Coinbase was talking about relocating the headquarters outside the United States 2 years ago, almost to this date. But having that confidence, and then we're seeing things that the government's doing. Had the White House summit. You had the SEC is having roundtables right now. There are all of the leadership is being replaced. The FDIC, the OCC, the SEC just yesterday just had a new chair. All of these things are just as important as legislation being passed. Is having confidence in faith in the U.S. government that is going to make changes, because in early 2023, there's kind of a misconception that FTX failing was what kind of caused everything to go sideways. That was horrible for the industry, and it did cause a lot of damage. But what caused more damage, during that period of time, like right in the early 2023, after Silvergate failed and Signature Bank failed, is when the regulators came in. FDIC and the OCC, even the SEC, and came in very heavy-handed and enforcement. And basically the choke point 2.0. People think that's a conspiracy theory. I could tell you, I lived through that. And I'm also one of the people that had that was was debanked. I mean, I lived through choke point 2.0. It was real, and that's what caused the damage to the crypto industry. Not FTX failing and SBF. It was the regulators. And now I'm seeing, and I'm sure the people on the panel here, I'm just seeing the amount of enthusiasm that I've seen since January 20th this year. It is unbelievable, and it's not. It's exciting to see the bills happening, but it's just the enthusiasm about the what is possible. Because going back 2 years ago, the view was nothing was possible.
Rachel, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You had a really strong piece on real world assets. Like divulge a little bit on how you see it.
Sure. So we have like a minute or two left, but I'll just say that I'm really excited about tokenizing real world assets and what's happening there, and tokenized US Treasuries, tokenized stocks, tokenized bonds. And I think that that's really an interesting thing that we're seeing. It's going to drive a lot of institutional interest, and we're seeing that explode now. Although it's been around for years, tokenization has been around for years, we're seeing that explode now because of the regulatory landscape and the Trump administration and the crypto-friendly regulations. So that's really exciting. I guess I'm going to just ask you guys now your final thoughts before we end the panel.
Well, yeah, just going back off of that, I've personally explored all sorts of assets that can be tokenized, and in my opinion, it is harder to do. At the more regulated level, it's always going to be more difficult. You need to work with like qualified institutional buyers or whatever, smaller market. But I've been exploring the space of private shares. So, all sorts of things ranging from common stock in private companies to preferred shares. And, those assets, they can have all various types of claims on ownership and like liquidation preference and things that VCs and like the professional investors at, investing in like Series A and beyond, like those people, what they care about. And it goes even beyond that to sort of like warrants and, a whole range. And then you can go into the debt side as well. And so I personally author smart contracts that tokenize these assets. And it has tremendous opportunity to unlock a lot of value, to streamline processes, make everything more efficient. When you have everyone on chain using these assets, the analogy I like to use is it's like what shipping containers did for global trade. So you have a standardized, physical way to transport goods and between ports, and you configure your ports to move these containers, and then you plug that into your nation's like logistical transport system and everything. And so what that did for global trade, tokenization, and these smart contracts and data standards is going to do for global finance.
I think this whole space is fascinating, whether it's DeFi or institutional adoption. I don't think we quite have the playbook. Constellation, the company that I founded 7 years ago, we're working with Panasonic. We've been working with the U.S. federal government, the Department of Defense, for 6 years, solving use cases outside of financial settlement, which I won't get into because I realize this is all like a financial crowd here. But there are other use cases beyond blockchain. And that go way beyond the depths of what we can do and imagine. And it's really fascinating. But the digital assets and the lack of regulation and clarity really impact institutional adoption and the innovation that follows, the core technologies and the fundamentals that follow that. So I urge everybody to really take a stance in what's going on here. Take a look at it. We have a pro-crypto government. When I started this thing, I was public enemy number one. I didn't want to reveal where I lived or what I did. And now we have an opportunity to talk. We have a bipartisan agenda around this. This is pure opportunity for adoption and enterprise institutions taking this, whether it's Panasonic, the federal government using it for different use cases, or settlement and payment and trusting entities to handle these digital assets. There is tech there. It's not that it's not there. It's been built for 10 years. It's just a bunch of degens ran it. So now we can harden that. We can do some cool things with it. All right.
Yeah. And just building on that optimism, when I think about the institutional adoption of DeFi, I just get really excited. And I'm really excited to be living through this change of finance. A lot of the stuff we're doing at DWP and a lot of the partners we have in this room have a lot of impact to create policy and drive that adoption. And it's really exciting to be a part of that. I always say, as the compliance officer, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I can confidently say I'm very optimistic about the institutional adoption of this asset class. So looking forward to what's to come.
30 trillion. That is what Standard Chartered has just come out in a recent report that they say will be tokenized, that real world assets will be tokenized by 2034. That is less than 10 years from now. And that's not including stable coins. So that's huge. And so that's coming. And also, since I'm representing XDC, I think a good chunk of that's going to be on XDC. XDC already has BlackRock, Fidelity, State Street funds on XDC. And also, we already are going to have about 500 million in Brazil.
Very well said. That's a great way to end the panel. And if anybody wants to learn more about tokenization of real world assets, as Ben mentioned, I wrote a great article for cryptonews.com. It was published this week, and you guys should all read it because it really goes in depth on what that is, what it means, and the utility and why that's important. Because although there's predictions that there's going to be trillions of dollars, these tokenized assets, utility is really important. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And on this panel, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the mechanics of blockchain infrastructure. So it's going to be all about tech-related topics. And I think the first question that I'd like to ask the panelists to start off is just what are the most important technical aspects for investors to focus on currently and why? And whoever wants to kick off the panel.
Some of the things that we look at, and I think will drive a lot of traction for investors, and it's our thesis at Digital Wealth Partners and most of the people in the room here, you're looking at utility-driven assets, right? Things that are going to be used in some specific application. We just had Ben Jorgensen up here from Constellation and Ken from XDC. These networks and the token on them are going to be moving data and value, and because of the adoption of these networks, you should see potentially some increase in the potential value of those tokens, right? And because of the utility of the protocol and the network and the adoption for the other applications. So we're looking for ways to be able to generate returns and put those to work in DeFi applications and to be able to support the network, XDC, the nodes on the network, generate a return for people that are willing to stake that asset and validate those transactions. So I think that you'll continue to see more of those things come to the forefront and more ways for investors to participate in those activities. And it's definitely something that we are looking to bring to the table as well.
All right. So from my perspective, regarding what's important to investors and institutions alike, DeFi. Right. So we heard a lot of conversation about that in previous panels. I think what's not touched on about DeFi enough is it's serving as a catalyst regarding institutional acquisition. A lot of times, people who don't understand the technological components behind what's going to cause demand via the utility often hit you with the coins in circulation and market cap arguments. You familiar with those?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing with that, okay? Just because an asset has a high supply does not mean that it can't reach a high price. You need a high demand and you need acquisition coupled with that. DeFi ecosystems often operate within sidechain environments. This means that the institution will have to go out to the mainnet in correlation with it and lock up a certain amount of tokens in order to transmit that utility within the sidechain environment. Now, you're going to hear some rebuttals about that, and people are going to say, well, the lockup period is temporary. Well, that's true, but not with DeFi, not with ETFs, not with ETPs, not with traditional legacy system investment vehicles that require long-term holding of a blockchain's native asset. So, like Jake said, I think when you see all that stuff happen, you're going to see exponential growth in some of these assets, and you can quote me.
Yeah, I can kind of riff off of that. So what we're seeing with crypto assets and DeFi, this is like the precursor and gold standard for what provides utility, because a native asset, you can do a lot of things with it. Everything in DeFi, you can swap it, you can like earn yield on it, you can stake it, you can do all these things, and you can't do that with like traditional assets that are tokenized just yet. But maybe that's where things are headed. I mean, I think so. And we're starting to see that, it's Bitcoin-backed loans, like all of these really interesting things. But what happens when you have stocks on the blockchain and then you can take out loans against that, leverage it as collateral? Like, you can't really do that. Maybe you can. There's some people who can probably do that, but it's just getting started. So when it comes to utility, it's the blockchains that are enabling this, and that's where the value is going to accrue.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about user interface and how important that is for investors today, because I know a lot of like these Web3 apps have poor user interface. So let's talk a little bit about that, the technical challenges, and why that should be fixed.
I'll kick us off with this real quick because I have the mic. So there's something you all should know. When it comes to wallets, you might be familiar with MetaMask, and MetaMask is not a great user experience. And then you have your seed phrase, and you get worried about leaking that, and you have to use your password to log into MetaMask, and then it's just weird. But there's not even on the horizon, it's all available now, something called embedded wallets. And this doesn't require any third-party software installation. It's like literally you can go to a web page and it'll use this like browser embedded wallet that you can use, and it's easy to set up. There's no seed phrase. There's a thing called passkeys. So this is the new kind of like technology that's replacing seed phrases, and it has biometric authentication. So like you're used to Face ID on your iPhone. Now, instead of signing crypto transactions like however you're used to doing it, you can just use your Face ID to authorize the transaction. And this just like streamlines things in a huge, huge way to like in a way where we're all used to doing it. Everyone has an iPhone, and basically interacting with crypto is going to be like doing whatever you are accessing on your iPhone.
Yeah, so you're developing some software, and you actually have a very nice UI. People haven't seen CapSign yet, but when it comes out, it's pretty slick. So, I've seen both ends of it. There's a lot of tools out there that people use that can be very complicated, and sometimes just there's been a lot of discussion on the panels today about the nuance that's required to participate in this space at a high level. You might need to move or purchase. But as an example, right, so we'll just go back to XDC over here with Ken. When it was an ERC20 token, I had to buy Ethereum on my MetaMask, and then connect that to another wallet and send that Ethereum over to this random wallet. And then I had to convert it into XDC. And then that was the only place you could buy XDC, was this one random wallet using a conversion. Most people are not going to figure that out, right? It's too complicated. There's a bunch of steps. There's seed phrases. There's wallet addresses. Buy this, transfer that. It's just way too complicated. And so over the past 5 years, we've seen a really significant progression in some of the solutions that are coming out. I just had a podcast with Austin King, and he's developed a project called Omni. And what they're looking to do is make it super easy for you to get DeFi yield on any asset, click of a button, right? Most people have a short attention span, and that's been proven by TikTok at this point. So if you're able to just have a few clicks, right, and it's simple and easy to understand, those are going to be the winners. And sometimes that's also a problem, because if people understand that, they use it to rip people off. I've seen some really sexy, slick scam apps out there for you staking something, and then you get rugged, right? So you need to be aware of those things. You need to understand who you're interacting with. But I do think, Coinbase, all of these large institutions, they are looking to reduce the number of clicks and make it easier for people to participate on their platforms. And I think that trend is going to continue.
Thank you. Kind of to piggyback off of what both of them have said, user experience is paramount. I'll give you an example from an exchange perspective. Bitrue, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's a paired exchange, but it is a pain, or was a pain, because we can't use it anymore, unfortunately. As tech guys, it's whatever, but having to purchase a stable coin and then move it over to an exchange and then find the pair and then essentially go into the pair and then purchase the asset and then enter in, I don't know how many passwords. That's not feasible for everyday use. And I think decentralized applications often get overlooked because people don't realize you're essentially using a blockchain version of GUI, right? It's a user interface. So I'll use this analogy without being too nerdy. I'm not gonna, let's say I want to direct someone to something on a file share. I'm not gonna have them open the command line interface to navigate to it, right? That's ridiculous, okay? Instead, you're gonna click on the Windows Explorer application that's right there in front of you, and then you're gonna navigate to your network location. Think about that, but in a blockchain sense. This is what you wanna see, because this is gonna lead to the demand that we need for these institutions to come in and say, hey, I'm a banker. I don't know anything about tech or IT, but you know what? I know how to click these buttons and essentially interconnect my interface with this technology in a streamlined manner. And so this is part of the reason why you haven't seen massive institutional adoption yet, because it's not user friendly, and bankers are not technologists. So I'll keep it short and sweet on that.
So any other bottlenecks that you guys want to discuss that's holding back institutions using blockchain besides user interface?
Yes. So I'm going to go back in time. Okay. We heard some talk earlier on the other panel, and this is going to get a little spicy, so beware. Back in, I think it was 2018, in between 2016 and 2018, our 3 member banks tested XRP as a no-escrow account replacement. It worked flawlessly. It saved institutions over 70%. It was robust, and it was efficient. Now, you ask yourself, if these institutions like Santander, the Royal Bank of Canada, etc., use this and had great success with it, why wouldn't Congress and the rest of our government jump all over this to approve it? Well, this is a theory, but I'm going to tell you right now, the legacy system traditionally doesn't want anything that's going to disrupt it or circumvent it, okay? The gentleman earlier from Constellation DAG made a good point when he said initially when crypto came out, it was kind of an overthrow the bank type of narrative that was, put out, unfortunately. With that being said, I personally believe that the institutions were told, or excuse me, let me rephrase that. The institutions told our legislators, hold off, because we need to make sure that these fintech companies and these technologies are not going to circumvent our bottom line. Okay, you can't have something out there that's going to move trillions essentially daily, putting the legacy banking system out of business or competing with it. So I think once the narrative changed to integration, you strategically saw a new administration come in, crypto-friendly OFAC, Treasury Department, Fed, SEC, OCC, DTCC, FDIC, all the C's, right? And okay. So with that being said, I think now that that narrative switch has happened and we're seeing integration, I think we're on the right path, and I think that's what we need. I think we need collaboration between fintechs, blockchains, and the legacy banking system, and we'll get to where we're trying to go.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I was going to say regulation, but you pretty well covered that. And again, to the other point, if you're disintermediating people that are in the middle making money, then they're going to have objection. But I think at scale, this technology allows for the movement of money the same way email allowed for the movement of information, right? So you can think about postal. Like, how many letters do you think were sent by people in the 1980s? I don't know, maybe 20 a week. That's probably on the high side, right? How many emails do you get every day? Hundreds, right? So you can think about that the same way for payments. There's these frictions, there's these costs, there's this latency that currently exists, but once it becomes frictionless and you can send $1 million for less than a penny, you're going to see the payment volume skyrocket. And so even if banks were to, cut costs way down, they're still going to have actually more margin on adopting this technology than they actually have today. And the volume that's going to be piped through those pipes is going to be exponentially higher than what it's. So they'll actually end up making more money. And I think it took a little bit for them to understand that that was how this was going to work. They needed to see it proven over and over again. But the velocity of money is about to exponentially increase. And I think that's actually going to be the lever that, these central banks pull this time around, because they don't have many options left. Printing M2 money supply and interest rates, would cause the reverse carry trade to unwind. So I think let's just adopt this other technology and increase the velocity of money. And I think it actually gets them to a much better spot.
I did have one more quick thought on usability, which is a huge unlock, which people might not even consider, but just consider this. If you wanted to swap a token to another token so that you could put that token you swap to into a yield product, that's 2 transactions. If you're doing it the blockchain way, you gotta sign the transaction, click the button or whatever for both of those. And you can imagine workflows that are more advanced than that, where maybe instead of 2 steps, there's 3, 4, 20 steps, whatever it might be. There are complex financial workflows out there, especially for institutional adoption, in order to make this blockchain rail reality. And so that's where new kind of thing that's come on to make things easier is something called transaction batching. So this bundles up all of those transactions, and you can just sign it one time, authorize it, and it'll execute all of those steps in one fell swoop. And that's a huge usability unlock. It's on most of the major chains by now, and it's being integrated into all of the dApps, and it's unlocking so much potential.
Well, that's wonderful. I know we're running low on time. Any final comments? Yes, before we end?
I'll make this quick. I'm not the best at analogies, but my friend Kurt is, and so I've kind of taken his lead on this. When you hear someone tell you that a high supply utility-based asset can't exponentially increase in value, I'm going to give you an example, and I use this in Twitter Spaces. I'm a comic nerd. Hulk 181 is probably my favorite book. It's the first appearance of Wolverine on a front cover. Now, what people don't know about that comic book is that there were over 400,000 of those printed in 1973. That is not a rare book. However, after Wolverine's popularity in the late 80s and early 90s, cartoons, movies, etc., the book skyrocketed to thousands of dollars. Most collectors hold an average of 5 copies of that book. You go to a convention and you see the book available, a bad condition version of that issue runs you about $3,000. That's scarcity, folks. Okay. They're not destroying it. They're not burning it. All right. They're holding it. And just remember that when you're looking at these investments, that eventually there is going to be value seen in them where institutions and folks with a whole lot of capital want to go out there and hold it. Okay. And people that tell you that institutions are not going to do that don't have a clue what DeFi even is in the first place, because that's going to require that. ETFs and ETPs are going to require that and more. Okay. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So I just wanted to put that out there and give you guys an analogy to battle arm yourselves with.
I love that. Thank you. Jake, any final thoughts?
Just super excited to be a part of this, to see the tech come full circle and actually be used in actual applications and be at the forefront of that. Connor mentioned this earlier in the evening, but you really are at the inflection point of seeing this tech actually be implemented. And so for you to be here today and be listening to these fantastic panelists, just super blessed and happy to be here.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much else to add, but whoever's been holding their bag and diamond handing the whole way from like way back when, and you see how far the technology has come and how far yet it will go, is like exciting, and that's what keeps me invested in the space. And like, you guys definitely should take that all into consideration. This is still like super, super early for the technology. Like, it almost feels like $30 trillion, folks. That's that's a lot of money, and we're at like 0.6 billion or trillion. So like in 10 years, and the time is like now. We finally have the scaling, we have the usability enhancements, and then it's gonna be, you're gonna be using it and you won't even know you're using it. So that is the new era. And we've been waiting for this for so long, but it's finally here.
So everyone, this is our final panel of the evening, and I'm going to be just chatting with Jake today about his thoughts on the event and what he hopes to see in the future and all of that good stuff. So Jake, if you could just tell us a little bit about, what excited you the most about the discussions here today, that would be great.
I thought all of them were very compelling. Again, just to be a part of what's going on with the institutional adoption of this stuff is wild. Just a few years ago, I was watching YouTube videos, like I'm sure most of you guys do in the audience, feeling like I knew certain people because I watched them so frequently. And now we have them here at the event. I know them. It's just surreal. So I would just say, the fraud panel I thought was exceptional. Charles Finfrock, John Wingate, I think provided a lot of insight into like what you can actually do if something bad happens to you. That's a frequent question that I get. I don't want to say daily, but for sure weekly. We have people that unfortunately succumb to bad actors in the space and need some type of recourse to be able to go after them and get their tokens back. So kudos to those guys. Thank them so much for participating in this and shedding light on what you can actually do.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And did you read that new FBI report that just came out about, what was it, $9.3 billion in fraud last year?
In crypto?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, that just came out this week, and it's crazy to see what's happening with like these schemes. And
Well, I talked to John a little bit earlier, and he let me know that some of the people that we've sent him, they've already recovered millions of dollars just in the last few months here. So there is hope out there. People do get their stuff back.
definitely. So, as someone working directly with high net worth individuals and family offices, what shifts are you seeing in their approach to digital asset allocation? And how do you expect this to evolve through the remainder of this year and beyond?
I've seen a significant uptick. People are starting to look at this space and starting to allocate again. I think if we see a bit more price action and adoption, regulation has been a big holdup. And now that we have bipartisan support for this, I think we've turned a corner and people are starting to pay more attention. Just by the attendance here tonight in the event, you can kind of see there's a certain energy in the room, which has been really cool to experience. But in having these conversations, most family offices are looking to preserve their wealth. They're not looking for
taking huge risks or risking a large portion of their portfolio. Most of the time in the conversation, it's still somewhere between 25 basis points and maybe up to 5% of their portfolio they're looking at allocating to digital assets. And it's an asymmetric bet, right? If you're able to pick some of the winners, or even if you're diversifying across some of the more utility driven assets in this space, I think that you could have, a double in your portfolio over the next couple years from the adoption and the price appreciation of these tokens. So if you are looking to make an allocation, I'm not saying, nothing here is financial advice. If you want financial advice, you can go talk to Digital Wealth Partners because they're licensed. But yeah, I think taking a small risk with things that you could lose, and it would make a material difference in your life, is still the conversation with most high net worth individuals or family offices. Now, we do work with a lot of people that have made their money in digital assets, or they, for whatever reason, have a high conviction in this asset class, and they have put a significant amount of their net worth into digital assets. Personally, that's where I'm at, right? But I also live and breathe this stuff. And so, to Matt's point early on in the evening, I think if you're investing in something, you should have a pretty good understanding of it, or be working with professionals that understand it at a very high level.
Definitely, I agree. Based on what you're seeing at the helm of the many disruptive companies you own, what have you realized or learned as we see a rapid convergence between traditional finance and digital assets? And how might this reshape investment strategies for both institutional and retail participants?
It's a good one. Well, and this is kind of the premise of why we put this event on. Most people, they've heard of crypto, they've heard of Bitcoin, right? Maybe, or Ethereum, maybe. The understanding of this asset class is actually still very, very nascent. And I've come to realize this even more. We're working with the Digital Chamber, and we're on these working groups proposing legislation to the SEC and having these conversations with people that are professionals in this industry, that have been in the industry for years. They still don't understand all the little nuances and how this technology works, and they're attempting to regulate it. And because of some of the misunderstandings, or their, I don't want to say ignorance, but just they don't know, right? And I think we're still very early on, and that's really what I've come to realize in working in the capacity that we have been on both the wealth management side, and then also building out products that utilize the underlying technology. Most of the people out there still just really are, I don't want to say behind, but don't even understand what this technology is capable of. And I think the people that do have a significant advantage.
Yes, definitely. With the regulatory landscape continuing to evolve, what specific guidance would you offer to attendees looking to position themselves advantageously while maintaining compliance in this dynamic environment?
So we're kind of at the forefront of that. The gentleman that were up here again on the fraud panel talked about institutional grade custody. If you do have a significant allocation to digital assets, I'd highly recommend that you look to get to institutional custody sooner than later. Having these assets on a hard drive or a cold wallet in your safe or in your desk drawer, probably not the most secure way to hold them, especially if it is a large portion of your net worth, right? Your spouse may not be familiar with these assets. God forbid something happened to you, they could be lost. We've seen a lot of this. There's a lot of Bitcoin that'll never be recovered, right? Because they were on hard drives, got thrown away. People lost access with their keys. Who's the gentleman that's got like $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and he's got like 2 guesses left to this password? Otherwise, the wallet gets destroyed. So there's just so many situations where I would encourage you again, and it doesn't even have to be to work with us. There are other people out there, if you have enough digital assets, that you can access and get institutional grade custody. But I think we're doing it at a high level. So yeah, I would just encourage you to start having those conversations and look that direction, and try to find the institutional partners now, before something bad does occur.
Yeah, that's great. So any final thoughts before we end the event tonight? Anything that you want to share with us?
Still just, and I didn't get to talk about the domino theory. We started a little late. I had a whole speech prepared at the beginning of this deal, and we're running a little late. So thank you guys for your patience and hanging out with us this evening. I think in 2025, we're going to see some very significant volatility in markets and potentially even a credit crisis globally because of the reverse carry trade unwinding. If you're not familiar with reverse carry trade, people have borrowed trillions, tens of trillions of dollars from Japan over the last 20 years because of the low interest rates there. And they've taken that money, converted it to dollars, and then put it to work in our capital markets across the board: gold, crypto, treasuries in particular, and in the U.S. stock market. And we've seen some downward pressure. I don't think it's actually been the tariffs. I think that's the narrative that they're giving the public. But I'm highly confident that it's actually a very slow unwind of the reverse carry trade. People running for the door, and the public doesn't know it yet. But I do think there will be a point where, that last chair gets pulled from the musical chairs and everybody runs for the door at once. And when that happens, again, like I spoke about earlier, they're going to need a way to de-risk and move things very quickly for these investment banks that already have significant losses, and also be able to offset that debt on their balance sheet or those liabilities with the appreciation of assets. And I think they've set themselves up perfectly for this. But I think at that point, there's going to be a moment where they start utilizing this technology, and it's going to be one of those, situations where it's a crisis, and then they roll out the solution for people. So I think that I won't say it's imminent, but I think it's highly likely here in 2025 we see that. And I think the people that are here this evening and are positioned well in specific digital assets are going to reap a lot of benefits from that.
Yes, that's a great way to end the night. And I just want to let all of you guys know Jake is coming on my podcast. We're filming it tomorrow and it will air next week. So if you guys want to find out more about Jake and his thoughts on various topics that I'll be asking him, be on the lookout for the interview next week on Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. I'm really excited to have Jake on. So other than that, I think we're good. This has been a wonderful event. Last year was also great. I can't wait for next year. And Jake, thank you again.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Y'all have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you guys at the next one.